In the quiet, frozen forests of Newfoundland, there is a scar on the earth that time has struggled to heal. It is a place where the silence is heavy, marking the site of a tragedy that did more than just claim lives. It shattered the public's trust in the institutions designed to protect them. When we speak of aviation disasters, we usually expect a linear path. A crash occurs, investigators sift through the wreckage, a cause is determined, and the world learns a lesson. That is the promise of modern safety. But on December 12, 1985, that promise was broken in Canada. The crash of Aero Air Flight 1285 remains the deadliest aviation accident to ever occur on Canadian soil. 256 souls were lost in a heartbeat. But the true horror of Gander wasn't just the inferno that consumed the pine trees that morning. It was the war that followed. It was a battle fought not with weapons, but with typewriters, forensic reports, and accusations of deceit. It was a conflict so toxic that it tore the Canadian Aviation Safety Board apart, leading to a historic split where 4 investigators risked their careers to scream that the government was lying to the people. Was it ice on the wings, or was it a bomb in the hold? Today, we are not just recounting a disaster, we are reopening the cold case file of a cover-up that changed Canadian history. To understand the magnitude of this loss, we must look at who was on that plane. These were not ordinary travelers. They were the Screaming Eagles, members of the United States Army's elite 101st Airborne Division, a unit with a legendary history, tracing its lineage back to the paratroopers who dropped behind enemy lines on D-Day, and the soldiers who fought through the jungles of Vietnam. But in 1985, their mission was one of peace. They had spent 6 grueling months in the Sinai Peninsula as part of a multinational peacekeeping force. They had lived in the desert, far from their families, ensuring that the fragile peace in the Middle East held firm. By December, they were exhausted, they were homesick, and they were finally going home. The charter flight that picked them up was operated by Aero Air, a Miami-based carrier that, like many charter airlines of the 1980s, did a brisk business transporting military personnel. The aircraft was a Douglas DC-8-63CF, a stretched version of the classic jetliner. It was an older machine, a workhorse of the sky that had seen thousands of hours of service. The flight path was long, originating in Cairo, Egypt, stopping in Cologne, West Germany for a crew change, and then making a final refueling stop in Gander, Newfoundland, before the last leg to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. When the aircraft touched down in Gander at 5:30 in the morning, it descended into a harsh Canadian winter. The airport, originally built as a strategic staging point for transatlantic flights during World War II, was enveloped in darkness and cold. The temperature was freezing, and a light, freezing drizzle was falling from the sky. It was the kind of weather that makes Canadian pilots vigilant, the kind of wet cold that soaks into metal and turns to ice in an instant. Inside the terminal, however, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the bleak runway. It was warm, bright, and filled with relief. The soldiers flooded into the transit lounge, stretching their legs after hours in the cramped cabin. They bought souvenirs from the gift shop, stuffed moose, maple syrup, and, ironically, T-shirts that read, "I survived Gander, Newfoundland." They lined up at the payphones, feeding coins into the slots to call their wives, parents, and children in Kentucky. They left messages saying, "Put the coffee on, we'll be there by breakfast." The mood was electric with the anticipation of Christmas. For many, this was the first time they would see their newborns. For others, it was a reunion they had dreamed of for half a year. While the soldiers celebrated, out on the tarmac, the new flight crew was preparing the DC-8 for departure. Captain John Griffin, First Officer John Connolly, and Air Engineer Mike Fowler had taken over the aircraft in Cologne. They were experienced airmen. Captain Griffin had been flying for Aero Air for 4 years, but as they conducted their pre-flight checks, they faced a critical decision. The aircraft had been sitting on the ground for over an hour, its metal skin cold-soaked from the flight at high altitude. The freezing drizzle was falling. The ground crew asked the standard question, "Do you want de-icing?" It is a question that has been asked a million times in aviation. De-icing costs money, and more importantly, to a charter schedule, it takes time. The flight engineer, Mike Fowler, conducted a walk-around inspection. In the darkness of the ramp, using a flashlight, he checked the wings and the engines. He reported back that the wings were clear enough. They had picked up a little ice on the approach, but in their judgment, it wasn't a threat. The order was given, no de-icing. We are good to go. It was a decision that would be scrutinized by lawyers and scientists for the next decade. At 6:45 a.m., the 248 soldiers and 8 crew members were back on board. The aircraft was heavy. It had taken on a massive load of fuel for the flight to Kentucky. The total weight was calculated, the bugs were set on the airspeed indicators, and the checklists were completed. A last-minute communication from the tower directed them to runway 22. It was a change from their expected departure, but runway 22 was the longest strip of pavement at Gander, stretching nearly 10,000 feet. It offered the best possible margin for safety. Aero Air 1285, you are cleared for takeoff. The engines roared to life, shattering the morning silence. The massive jet began its roll down the runway. Inside the cockpit, the crew called out the speeds. 80 knots, V1, rotate. At a speed of 167 knots, Captain Griffin pulled back on the yoke. The nose of the DC-8 lifted into the air. The main landing gear left the ground. But almost immediately, the sensation of flight was wrong. Instead of climbing aggressively into the sky, the aircraft felt sluggish. It was vibrating violently. The stick shaker, a mechanism designed to warn pilots of an impending stall, would have been rattling the control column, a tactile scream telling them that the wings were not generating enough lift. Witnesses on the ground, including car rental agents and other airport staff, watched in horror. They described the plane as mushing through the air. One witness famously said, "She's flying like a pig." The nose was pitched up dangerously high, fighting for altitude that the laws of physics were refusing to grant. The aircraft crossed the Trans-Canada Highway at an impossibly low altitude. Truck drivers passing by in the pre-dawn darkness looked up to see the belly of the jet skimming just feet above their cabs. The landing gear was retracted, but the plane was sinking. And then the truck drivers saw something else, a glow. A distinct orange glow emanating from the aircraft before it even touched the trees. Was it the afterburners? Was it a compressor stall? Or was it fire? Less than a mile from the end of the runway, Aero Air 1285 ran out of time. The belly of the aircraft clipped the tops of the pine trees. The right wing struck the ground first, tearing off and spilling thousands of gallons of atomized jet fuel. The fuselage cartwheeled into the dense forest, breaking apart as it went. The explosion was apocalyptic. A massive mushroom cloud of fire rose into the winter sky, visible for miles. The impact and the subsequent inferno were so intense that they incinerated everything in their path. For the 256 people on board, there was no escape. The Screaming Eagles had survived the dangers of the Middle East, only to perish in the snow of a friendly nation. The sun rose over a scene of absolute devastation. The crash site was a smoldering scar in the forest. Wreckage was scattered everywhere: twisted metal, engine parts, and the heartbreaking personal effects of the young soldiers. Presents wrapped in Christmas paper lay burned in the snow. Letters to loved ones were scattered among the debris. The investigation began immediately. But it started with a handicap. The Canadian Aviation Safety Board, or CASB, dispatched its top team, led by investigators David McNair and Peter Bogue. They arrived to find that the vital clues they needed were largely missing. The aircraft's flight data recorder was an archaic model, a foil recorder that etched only 4 basic parameters: airspeed, altitude, heading, and vertical acceleration, onto a roll of stainless steel. It offered no data on engine performance, control surface positions, or pilot inputs. Even worse, the cockpit voice recorder, the device that captures the pilot's final conversations, had failed. It was silent. There were no voices. There were no final words to tell investigators if they were fighting an engine fire, if they were battling the controls, or if they had seen something terrifying. The investigators were effectively deaf and partially blind. As the team sifted through the charred remains, a shadow fell over the investigation. An anonymous call was made to a U.S. consulate in Oran, Algeria. The caller claimed to represent Islamic Jihad, a terrorist organization with links to Hezbollah. They claimed responsibility for the crash. This was 1985, a time of high tension. The memory of the Beirut barracks bombing, which had killed 241 American servicemen just 2 years prior, was fresh in everyone's mind. The possibility that this was a targeted assassination of American troops could not be ignored. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police swept the site for explosives. They sent debris to labs to test for chemical residues of TNT or plastic explosives. But time and again, the reports came back negative. There was no direct forensic evidence of a bomb. For David McNair and the majority of the CASB investigators, the terrorist theory was a distraction. They believed the answer lay in the basics of aerodynamics. They formulated what would become the official theory: ice and weight. The logic of the majority was sound, grounded in the unforgiving physics of flight. They argued that the crew's decision not to de-ice was fatal. Wind tunnel tests conducted later would show that even a layer of ice as thin and rough as medium grit sandpaper could reduce a wing's lift by 25% or more. This roughness disturbed the smooth airflow over the wing, causing it to separate and stall at a much lower angle of attack than normal. But ice alone wasn't the only culprit. The investigators looked at the weight of the aircraft. The flight manifest listed the passenger weights using a standard civilian average of 170 pounds per person. But these were not civilians. They were combat soldiers, physically fit and muscular, carrying heavy military kits, boots, and winter gear. When investigators recalculated the load using actual medical records and realistic gear weights, they found a discrepancy that was staggering. The plane was not carrying 170-pound passengers. The real average was closer to 220 pounds. The aircraft was approximately 12,000 pounds heavier than the crew had calculated. The majority concluded that Flight 1285 was a double-killer scenario. The plane was too heavy, requiring a higher speed to generate lift, and the wings were contaminated with ice, destroying the lift they could generate. When Captain Griffin rotated the nose, he didn't fly, he stalled the aircraft. It was, in their view, a tragic operational accident caused by complacency and procedural error. This explanation should have closed the story. It was logical, it fit the weather, but it did not fit the evidence seen by everyone. 4 members of the Canadian Aviation Safety Board, led by Les Philotis, an aeronautical engineer, looked at the draft report and refused to sign it. This was unprecedented. In the polite world of Canadian bureaucracy, such open rebellion was unheard of. But Philotis and his colleagues, the dissident group, believed that the majority was ignoring critical evidence that pointed away from ice and towards something far more sinister, an onboard fire. The dissidents pointed to the witnesses. Why did seasoned truck drivers and airport staff report seeing a glow on the aircraft before it hit the trees? The majority dismissed these accounts as engine backfires or compressor stalls. But the dissidents argued that a compressor stall is a series of loud bangs, not a sustained glow. They believed the witnesses were seeing a fire burning through the fuselage. Then there was the physical evidence. The dissenters focused their attention on the number 3 engine. During the teardown of the wreckage, investigators found impact marks on the engine's inlet guide vanes. More suspiciously, they found traces of foreign paint transfer on the metal. To Philotis, this looked like debris from the cargo hold had been blown outward by an explosion, striking the engine intake. If the plane had simply crashed into the trees, the debris should have been ingested from the front, not blown out from the side. But the most chilling piece of evidence, the smoking gun for the dissenters, came from the bodies of the soldiers themselves. Toxicology reports were ordered on the victims. The results showed that a significant number of the passengers had lethal or near-lethal levels of carbon monoxide and cyanide in their blood. The majority report argued that this happened post-crash. They claimed the victims inhaled the toxic smoke in the seconds after the impact. But the dissenters looked at the pathology. The impact forces of the crash were massive. The plane had disintegrated. Medical examiners determined that death for most passengers would have been instantaneous due to extreme trauma. If they died instantly upon impact, how could they have inhaled smoke? The presence of high levels of carbon monoxide in the blood suggested only one thing to the dissenting members. The soldiers were breathing smoke while they were still alive. They were breathing smoke while the plane was still in the air. This meant there was a fire raging inside the cabin before the crash occurred. The implications were terrifying. If there was an onboard fire, what caused it? The dissenters stopped short of explicitly blaming a bomb, but the subtext was clear. Theories began to swirl about the shadowy world of geopolitics. Was there an incendiary device? Was there volatile, undeclared cargo on board? Some even speculated about the involvement of the Iran-Contra affair, suggesting the plane might have been carrying illicit munitions. In 1988, after 3 years of deadlock, the CASB released its final findings. But in a move that shocked the nation, they released 2 separate reports. The majority report, signed by 5 members, concluded that the probable cause was ice contamination and weight overload. The minority report, signed by 4 members, concluded that the crash was caused by an onboard fire or explosion of undetermined origin. The split was a national embarrassment. The Canadian public lost faith in the board. The government, unable to reconcile the 2 versions of the truth and facing immense pressure, took the drastic step of dissolving the Canadian Aviation Safety Board entirely. It was shut down. In its place, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada was created, with new legislation designed to prevent such a catastrophic breakdown in consensus from ever happening again. But the damage was already done. The warning that should have come from Gander was lost in the noise of the argument. The critical safety message that even a thin layer of ice is deadly to a jetliner was overshadowed by the talk of bombs and conspiracies. And tragically, history would repeat itself. 3 years later, in 1989, Air Ontario Flight 1333 crashed in Dryden, Ontario. It was a Fokker F-28, taking off in snowy conditions. The pilots, under pressure and perhaps not fully appreciating the danger of the wet snow on their wings, did not de-ice. The plane crashed into the trees just past the runway, killing 24 people. The investigation into Dryden proved definitively that ice was the killer. Many experts believe that if the Aero Air investigation had been unified, if the message about ice had been shouted from the rooftops instead of buried in a minority report, the pilots in Dryden might have made a different decision. The dysfunction at the CASB may have cost 24 more lives. Decades have passed since that dark morning in 1985. The crash site in Gander is now a quiet memorial. The trees have regrown, covering the scars on the land. A statue of a soldier holding the hand of a civilian child, known as the Silent Witness, stands guard over the place where so many dreams ended. The official cause of the crash of Aero Air Flight 1285 remains recorded in the history books as ice and weight. The minority report remains an official dissent, a ghost story of aviation history that refuses to go away. The Supreme Court of Canada eventually declined to reopen the investigation, stating that too much time had passed and the physical evidence was gone. We may never know with absolute certainty what happened in those final terrifying 60 seconds. Was it the unforgiving laws of aerodynamics punishing a heavy plane on a freezing night? Or was it a spark of violence in a volatile world covered up to protect diplomatic relations? What we do know is that the crash revealed a fragility not just in our machines, but in the very institutions we trust to find the truth. It showed us that when the search for answers becomes a battle of egos and politics, the first casualty is the truth, and the ultimate price is paid by the innocent. The soldiers of the 101st Airborne survived the desert, but they could not survive the controversy that awaited them in the snow. Today, as we look back, we are left with the uneasy realization that sometimes, even in the world of science and black boxes, the truth can be the hardest thing to find.